Hi everyone, Krista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about doing research in English records. We're going to talk about some just basics in getting started, especially if you are starting from the U.S. and trying to cross the pond. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what records are available for England online at Ancestry.com. And then we'll wrap up with just a couple of quick tips about some other resources that you might want to get your hands on if you start to dive into records in England pretty heavily. So with that introduction, let's dive in. Here is, I think, what I just shared with you. We're gonna run through each of these things. So let's start with this getting started. Getting started in English research is the same as getting started in any other kind of research. You need to have a specific research question that you're trying to solve so that you can focus your research and so that you can have success. So for today's purposes, we're going to start with this exercise. We are trying to discover who were the parents of John Abbott, who was born December 1845 in England. So we've identified who we are looking for, some identifying information that separates him from all of the other John Abbotts in the world, and then what specifically we are looking for. In this case, we're looking for the names of his parents. Now, the question you should always ask after you formulate your research question is, what do you already know and how do you know it? In this case, we have a record of John Abbott on the 1900 U.S. Census, listed with his wife and children. And one of those children is the ancestor of the person who sent this question in. So, according to the 1900 U.S. Census, John was living in the U.S. I think he was actually living in New Jersey, but he was born in England in December of 1845. He immigrated to the United States in 1869. So, if you do the math there, he would have been about 24 or 23 years old. And he was married to Elizabeth, his wife, in 1882. So there's a little bit of a timeline just available right there on that U.S. Census that gives us some insight into where we can go next and what we can do. Now, like all international research, and of course I'm speaking from a U.S. perspective, it is necessary to collect all possible records in the U.S. before moving on to the records from England. And there's a good reason for that. It does a few things for you. First of all, it helps you make sure that you've got the right person. One of the challenges with English research that might be a little bit more exaggerated than maybe some other countries is that how do I say this kindly? They don't use a lot of name variation. In every family, you're going to find a John and a Mary and a Richard and a Charles and a William and a Jane, Elizabeth, right? There are just it feels like a very few given names that they tend to recycle over and over again. There also are not a huge variety of surnames. English surnames tend to be, again, kind of a smaller subset. And so identifying information about your ancestor, occupation, a specific birth date if possible, anything that will tell you where in England they came from is going to be really crucial so that you know you have the right person, not his cousin or his uncle or somebody who isn't even related to him but just happens to have the same name and be born about the same time. So collect all possible records in the U.S. before moving on to U.S. records. In this case, if we're looking at John Abbott, we have that 1900 census. We need to trace him through 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940, until he dies. And I don't know when he dies, if it's before 1940 or not, but we need to make sure we have him in every U.S. census after the one that we've already located. We also need to make sure we have him in every census before. If you remember, that 1900 census says that he immigrated in 1869, and so we should be able to find him in the 1870 and 1880 census as well. For those of you who are new to genealogy, you may notice a gap here between 1880 and 1900. That 1890 census was destroyed in a fire, and so we might need to use city directories or state censuses that are sometimes taken on the fives. So there might be an 1885 or an 1895 state census that you can get your hands on. Those are the kinds of records we're going to use to fill in those gaps, particularly that 20-year gap between 1880 and 1900. But also it helps you fill in the gaps between the every 10-year censuses, just to follow the movements and the occupation and the addresses of your ancestor. Another important piece of information when we are tracing immigrant ancestors is naturalization records. Now, the 1900 through the 1930 census will list their naturalization status. So don't just look at what's been indexed, actually look at the image of the census record. Usually it's going to be just to the right of the immigration year. It will either say AL, which means that they are still an alien citizen. It will say PA, which means they have submitted papers, usually a declaration of intent to become a U.S. citizen, or it will say NA, which means they were naturalized. And in some cases, it will even list the year of naturalization. So check those censuses, pay close attention, and look for that naturalization status. That will help you narrow down your focus so that you can determine where those naturalization papers are. Now, when we talk about naturalization papers, we are not talking just about a certificate of naturalization. There is a complete packet of information. It includes a declaration of intent and a petition for naturalization. Those, usually it's about four pages long, 2 sides to each of those 2 documents. And it's going to have a lot of information like where and when they were born. And so you might get a specific birth date and a specific town, not just the name of a country. It could list information about their father, depending on what year they were naturalized and which court they were naturalized in and what paperwork was being used. It will list information about the date and the port and the ship that they came into the United States on. So in the case of our John Abbott, where he came when he was 24 years old, it's very possible that he came as an adult by himself, but he may have come with a sibling or a cousin. And of course, if your ancestors immigrated as children, it's very likely that they came with one or both parents. So that naturalization information is critical because it leads you to immigration information or passenger lists. Now, Ancestry.com has all of the district court naturalization records online. If your ancestor was naturalized in a local or a county court, you'll need to contact that county court where they were naturalized. That's why it's so important that you do this census and city directory work first, because you need to know where they were living when they were naturalized, so you know which county court you might need to contact to get a hold of that naturalization paperwork. Then, of course, you can search the immigration records, the passenger lists. Those are available on Ancestry.com. We have the complete run of passenger lists for New York, from before Ellis Island, which was opened in 1892, all the way through Ellis Island, and I think it goes all the way down to about 1956. Those records go back into the late 1700s. Of course, they're a little sketchy through the late 1700s and early 1800s because it was not required by law that those records be kept, but once immigration laws started coming into play, those passenger lists are going to be more complete as we move through the 1800s. There are other ports too besides New York. There's Philadelphia and Boston and Baltimore, and I could go up and down the eastern seaboard. There are ports in the south, New Orleans and Houston and Galveston. New Orleans and Galveston. There are ports on the west coast, and so any number of places they could have come in, but if you have that naturalization paperwork, it should help you narrow that focus a little bit. Now, you'll notice we've done all of this and we haven't even gotten to English records yet, so let's talk about those now. Once you've collected everything you can about your ancestor here in the United States, now you're ready to go into English research, or actually the records from England. So the first step, and that's what you're doing here today, is to just become familiar with the records that are available, the records that even exist. Every country is a little bit different in the way in which they keep records. And here in the United States, we have an additional challenge in that every state has their own laws about when they started keeping vital records and the privacy around them. So England is great because there's some really unified stuff across the country. However, there is a little bit of a challenge in that in England there is a 100-year privacy law on the census. So here in the United States, that privacy law is only 72 years, which means we just got the 1940 census last year because 72 years had elapsed. 9 years from now, or 8.5 years from now, we'll get the 1950 census because that 72 years will have elapsed. But in England, that's a 100-year privacy, which means the latest available census is 1911. And so if you have to be able to get your ancestor back before that in order to utilize those census records. Their census records begin in 1841. And again, they're taken every 10 years, just like they are here in the United States, but they're taken on the ones, as you can see, rather than on the tens. So 1841, 1851, 1861, and so on. So in the case of our John Abbott, we should be able to locate him in if you remember correctly, he was born in 1845. And he immigrated in 1869, so we should be able to locate him in both the 1851 and 1861 censuses, and most likely as a child with his parents, because you will have identified enough information based on U.S. records to hopefully tell which John Abbott, born in 1845, is your John Abbott. Now, if you can't, there are some other records available to you. The UK actually has a unique set of records, and these records are available online. They have outbound passenger lists available. So anybody that left the country, there are some records that were created at that time. So those are really helpful. They also have vital records, and I love this. I love English research for this one single reason. Vital records in England began in 1837. So if you're familiar with U.S. research, there are some states here in the United States who didn't start keeping vital records until the 1920s or the 1930s even. And so birth, marriage, and death records, those vital records, here in the U.S. are sometimes not available for certain locations, certainly not at a state level. Sometimes you can drill down to a county level or a town level, and they may have started keeping those records earlier. As a matter of fact, in New England, in some of the New England states, vital records were kept at a town level, sometimes back into the 1600s. And so that's excellent when it exists. But in England, that vital records creation date is 1837, and that is a national vital record, so it's coverage for the whole country, not just for a specific state or a specific county or a specific town. So you can search those records, and they're excellent. Now, there is a caveat with that. The government of England has made indexes for their birth, marriage, and death records freely available, and we have them online, and I'll show you here in just a minute where you can get those. However, they are just indexes, which means that there is not an actual record to view. You have to order that record from their General Register's office, or the GRO. So let me just walk you through how to find these vital record indexes on Ancestry.com, and then where you go to actually order copies of those certificates. So if I'm on Ancestry.com, and this is how I start most of my searches, many of you know, I'm going to go to the card catalog here under search. Let's make my screen a little bigger so we can all see it. I have a couple of options. I can type here in this title or keyword field, or I can use these filters over here on the left-hand side. So in this case, I'm going to go to Europe, and then I'm going to scroll down to United Kingdom, and then I'm going to click on England. So I'm looking for England records specifically. Now I could drill further down by county, but remember, England vital records, the 1837 civil registration date, is countrywide, and so it's a countrywide database, so I don't want to drill down by county yet. I can come up here and I can filter by record type, so I can say I want to look specifically at birth, marriage, and death records, and now here is a list of all of the databases that contain those birth, marriage, and death records. You'll see here, for example, I have the free BMD, and that means it is free. You do not have to have a subscription to search this database. You do have to have a registration and a user account, but you don't have to have a paid subscription, or you can just have a US subscription. You don't have to have an international subscription in order to access anything that says free BMD on that. These are records that were indexed by volunteers, which is why they're free. So here in this case, we have the England and Wales Free BMD Marriage Index. It covers 1837 to 1915. And there are more than 32 million records in that one database. You'll see the next database here that's broken out it picks up after that 1916 and goes through 2005. So their privacy laws around their vital records are much looser than their privacy laws around their census records. And there are 63, almost 64 million records in that particular database. So this one, however, is not free. We created that index, or worked with the GRO on getting that index, whereas this index was created freely by volunteers. So that's the difference between the two. So you do have to have a World Deluxe. If you're a U.S. subscriber, you have to have a World Deluxe subscription in order to access these post-1916 records. Now you'll see that the exact same configuration or scenario plays out when you're looking at birth records. Here is the free BMD birth index from 1837 to 1915, and then here is the supplement from 1916 to 2005. Down here we see the same thing for deaths, 1837 to 1915, and in this case it's 1916 through 2007 for those death records. Now, if I'm looking for my John Abbott, born in December of 1845, I can come in here, and I'm going to see if I can search exactly and see what comes up. So we're going to search for John Abbott, and he was born in 1845. And I'm going to go ahead and click search. And this is just to give you an idea of the types of, or how this index works. So I've got 27 results. 27 John Abbotts were born in 1845. Now the first thing that I hope you're going to pay attention to is this quarter of registration. The way that England handles their index of their birth, marriage, and death records is by quarter. So you have January, February, March, April, May, June. If I went down the list, you'd see July, August, September, and then October, November, December. So it's by quarter of the year. So my John was born in December of 1845, according to the 1900 census. And hopefully, if I've done some more research, I've located a death record, possibly his naturalization paperwork that narrows down or gives me a specific date. So clearly, his birth would not have been registered in the first, second, or third quarter of the year. It's possible that it was registered in the fourth quarter of the year, this October, November, December time period. So I could look at these records to determine if I have the right person. But keep in mind that registration was not always immediate. And so even though he was born in December of 1845, this is when the birth was registered. And so his birth could have been registered in January of 1846, and so I would need to check those records as well. Now, the other piece of information that we're going to see here, and let's just take a look at one of these so that you know, is the registration district that the birth was registered in. Now, that does not mean that that's the town where they were living in. It could just be the nearest registration district. We have inferred, Ancestry.com, from the information provided, we have inferred what county that registration district is in. So one of the things you need to do is to become familiar a little bit with English geography. If you have the name of a town where your ancestor was born from naturalization paperwork or an obituary, look it up on a map, see where the borders of the counties were at the time, not where they are now. England changed a lot of boundaries of their counties and even some county names in the 1970s, and so we need to be familiar with what the boundaries were. So you'll want to look at some historical maps and become familiar with where the nearest registration districts were, possibly even over county boundaries to where they were living at the time. Now in this case, I would probably look for the family in the 1851 census in England to determine if where they were living then, where it says John was born in 1845, 6 years earlier, and then check the map to see what's near. Now, this is the only information you get from the index, and this is where things get a little bit frustrating. I can come and actually view this image, and this image is not going to give me any more information. It is just an index to the actual records. So I can look here, and it's just a handwritten index that shows me the same exact information, right? Here's John Abbott, birth registered in Penrith. There's a Roman numeral for the information about the volume and the page number. And then if I scroll up here to the top of the page, it will give me information about the registration district and based on where what book this is, what index book this is, we know the year and the quarter. So that's the only information it gives you. So in order to get the actual certificate that's going to list the parents' names, to know if you have the right person or not, you have to order the certificate. This is the information you need to order that certificate. You can just click the order button over here on the left-hand side if you want to do it that way, and then we'll fill in that information for you. Or you can go to the General Register's Office of England. Their website here is gro.gov.uk, And when you get there, you'll see a little link here that allows you to order certificates online. These certificates are not cheap. They are £9.25, and so that translates into about $16 maybe US per certificate. And like I said, you don't always know when you order the certificate if it's actually your person or not. But it's worth it, of course, once you start to narrow that information down. So that's one of the reasons why it's so critical that you do that U.S. first research. But those records are still a gold mine. You get birth records that list a mother's maiden name or a marriage record that lists a spouse's maiden name, and you hit the jackpot. So it's absolutely worth it. Those are just some of the records that are available. So census records, passenger lists, and vital records from England to help you trace your family back. And of course, those vital records, like I said, go through 1837, which is fantastic. Now, prior to 1837, there are some other records that are still available. You can still research back further in the records. You saw me do this card catalog filter where I went to location. I went to the card catalog under search, and then under location, I clicked on Europe, and then United Kingdom, and then England, and then I clicked on record type. So if I come back here to my card catalog, you can see when I clicked on record type, these first records here under birth, marriage, and death are all the countrywide civil registration, or the GRO index. If I scroll down here a little bit, you're going to see there are millions of other records. In particular, these are going to be church records, parish records from the Church of England. A lot of these go back into the 1700s. In some cases, they go back into the 1500s. One of the cautions that I always give is when you find a database that you're interested in. So here is West Yorkshire, England, baptisms, marriages, and burials from 1512 through 1812. So I come here to this specific database and I get all excited. Okay, there are a couple of things I would encourage you to do first. Scroll down past that search box, read that database description. First of all, you'll learn where Ancestry.com obtained these records from. In this case, we obtained them from the West Yorkshire Archive Service. So these records came directly from the archive that holds them. And we were allowed to copy these records either from microfilm or from original documents. Sometimes these records come from somebody else who transcribed them, and so that's useful to know. Below that, you're going to see this database description that tells you what it is that you're looking at, what laws were in effect that affected the kinds of records that were created, if there are any limitations into the records themselves. In this case, sometimes this kills me. It says, in early records, it was not uncommon for women to simply be referred to as the wife of, and then the husband's name. So that's, again, useful to know if you're looking for the death of a woman and you can't find her under her name, search her husband's name, and you might find her listed as the wife of. Now, the other thing you want to do, just briefly before you start searching, is also check to see if there is a browse box. That's all going to be over here on the right-hand side. What that means is that there are images attached to this database, and I can click here and I can see which parishes are included in this database before I ever even start searching. So if I know my family was part of a specific parish in West Yorkshire, I can come here and I can scroll down this list to see that, in fact, All Saints Church in Normanton is included in this database. But the records for that parish only go back to 1754. So if I was looking for something earlier, it might not be available. I can scroll down here and I can see those records only go through 1812, but that works. So you can check this browse box to see what's available before you even start searching. Then, of course, once you start searching, you can plug in specific years and locations to help narrow or focus that search in this particular database, which has, let's see, 3 million records in this one database. So that's how I utilize the other records that are available. And like I said, England has excellent records for you to do research in. But just beware, one of the cautions is that that they have very common names very frequently, and those names get repeated generation after generation, and so you need to make sure that you have the right people. Don't just grab somebody because they have the same name and even look like they were born in the same time, about the same time and in the same place. So the more information you collect, the better, or the more likely you are to be tracing the correct people. Now, one other way to kind of explore on your own or discover what kinds of records are available for English research is to click on search and then scroll down to the map. So some of you are familiar with this. Let me just show you how you get there. If you just click on search, and it takes you to our advanced search page, then you scroll down past that search box and you're going to see a map. Now, if you are here in the US, and this default is going to be a map of the United States, but you'll see here there's a little tab for the UK and Ireland. So I can click on that, and then I can click on England, and it will take me to a place page for English research. Couple of things to note here. It will show you the databases that have English records. I can also click on this resource tab, and it will give me some of the same information that I've shared with you today. Just information about census records and parish registers and civil registration, some information or some links even to other places where you can do research. And this is a real gold mine right here. You can actually look and see what records the National Archives of England has available online. There is the Society of Genealogists, who have an extensive library. The Federation of Family History Societies from all over the UK, the British Library, London Metropolitan Archives, Januki. There's just links to other places online where you can do some additional research for records that might not be available on Ancestry.com. I can also then narrow it over here by county. So if you know, for example, that your family was only in Cornwall, ever in Cornwall, you can click on that and it will take you to a page that will show you records specific to Cornwall so that you can start to dig into those or just become familiar with what exists. So again, you get to that by clicking on search, scrolling down to that map, and then clicking on that UK tab in order to filter by country and then county specifically. Now, in our last couple of minutes here, I just want to share with you a couple of tips or tricks, and then some tools that some additional tools that are available to you. When you are searching, there is a way to only see UK records. There's a way to see only US records as well, but it's the collection priority box, and I hope you're using that. It really helps filter out some unnecessary search results. So if I'm here in my advanced search, and you want to make sure that you're using, if your search form looks like this, you're not getting the full power of search. You want to make sure that you click Show Advanced so that you have this advanced search form, and this search form then has a filter for every single field that allows you to control what your search results are returning. If you scroll down to the bottom of that search box, you're going to see a link here that says, or a box here that says Collection Priority. Now, right now I have it set to United States because I was doing US research last night. And I have this little box checked here that says Show Only Records from These Collections. I can change that to UK and Irish, which means as I search, the only thing that will show up in my search results are records that are associated with or affiliated with the UK and Ireland. So use that, and it will help you control your search results a lot better, so that you can filter through some of that stuff as you start to do some of those searches. Huge, huge benefit there. Also, even if you don't have a World Deluxe subscription, you can go to ancestry.co.uk. That's the country-specific website for the UK. So when anybody goes to Ancestry in England that lives there, it automatically takes them to ancestry.co.uk because that's what we call our localized country website. So I can come on here and I can click ancestry.co.uk or type that in here. And you'll see it looks a lot like Ancestry.com, but there are some differences because we have localized this website to this specific country. But what that means is that when you click on their help, and theirs is called Help and Advice. Here in the US, our link is called the Learning Center. But when you click on this Help and Advice link on the UK website, it will take you to UK specific helps. So the information there will be about UK census records and UK birth, marriage, and death records and UK parish records and common mistakes in British research, and it's more localized to that specific location. You can also sign up to receive their monthly newsletter. So you probably get the .com monthly newsletter, which of course is focused entirely on US records. But if you go to co.uk, you can sign up for their newsletter. Again, all of these Learning Center or Help and Advice Center resources on ancestry.co.uk are free. You do not have to have a subscription to ancestry.com, and if you have a US subscription to ancestry.com, you don't have to have a World Deluxe subscription. The only time you need a World Deluxe subscription is if you are trying to access UK records from outside of the UK. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, just ask me on chat or leave a comment. Last two resources I just want to talk about, and how do we run out of time every time? The last one is this website, which I mentioned just briefly earlier on that resources page on the England Place page. It's Genuki, Gen-U-K-I is what that's an abbreviation for, .org, and they have this beautiful map of all of the counties in the UK, but then you can click on any one of these counties and it will take you to a lot of free resources available for that location. So that's a really great, there are maps, and there are gazetteers, and there are lists of churches and parishes and where the registration districts cover and all of that, so that you can get familiar with the area where your ancestor lived, so that you know where to go to find the record you need. And then the last resource that I just want to let you know about, there is a book by Echo King. It's called Finding Answers in British Isles Census Records, where she walks through just step by step in really great detail each of the UK censuses, and they're all a little bit different, just like they are here in the US. They all record information just slightly differently, but it's a great resource. So if you can just Google that and find a bookseller either online or offline that has that available. If you're interested in British Isles research or just getting started in it, I would absolutely recommend that particular book. Well, we are over time, and I'm sorry, but I hope that was useful information. If you have any specific questions about British Isles research, I will be on chat in just a few minutes if you're watching this live. If you're watching an archived version of this, please leave a comment. I do try to monitor those and respond as needed. Until next time, this is Krista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.